Welcome to Counter Narrative News, today on the 6th of January 2023, bringing you the daily news. The Chinese state has successfully concluded a $500+ million oil deal with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. The Taliban regime came back to power in 2021 after the NATO occupation forces left. China has long-standing relations with Afghanistan, including supporting and arming and backing the perhaps wrongly called Holy Warriors or Mujahideen, supported by Thatcher and Reagan and armed by them in the 1980s to oppose and then eventually defeat the Soviet occupation there. The Afghan people have been suffering under Western sanctions since the return of the Taliban regime, which is wholly unfair for those who have nothing to do with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. On the other hand as well, there is no justification perhaps for the sanctions, but also the Taliban regime is a very oppressive regime that has banned all female staff from NGOs, stopped women going into education, and has publicly beaten women in and in part of their so-called judicial system there. Also news from Afghanistan, Prince Harry has recently admitted in killing 25 people when he served in the British Army as part of the NATO occupation of Afghanistan. He said the reason he is somewhat content having done that is that he met families of the victims of those who were killed in the attacks in September 11th, 2001 against the World Trade Center. Prince Harry argues that him killing these 25 people in Afghanistan was quote-unquote removing pieces from a chessboard. The comments that come to mind in relation to this is, first of all, those who attacked the World Trade Center were overwhelmingly people from Saudi Arabia and not Afghanistan. And to compare those Afghans killed to quote-unquote pieces on a chessboard is to put what Frantz Fanon would argue, putting these human beings into the zone of non-being, i.e. dehumanizing them in a framework of white supremacy and coloniality. The ANC party in South Africa is continuing with its national conference there. South African masses continue to face greater and growing pressure, like working masses throughout the world, in the quote-unquote cost of living crisis. However, the ANC president and South African president, Ramaphosa, seems to not be addressing this directly, but instead deflecting slightly in a slight right-wing direction in his so-called war against crime. But arguably crime cannot be addressed if the underlying issues of growing poverty are not addressed. In the Ukraine theatre of conflict, Russian soldiers from 8,000 miles away from Ukraine, from Yakutia, who've been recruited into the war there, have been uploading videos onto social media complaining about their treatment in being conscripted into this conflict. They are very dissatisfied, and they have been complaining that they are a peripheralized and oppressed people in Russia and should not be serving there. In Colombia, the second biggest left-wing armed guerrilla group, the ELN, has not agreed to conduct a ceasefire in relation to the Colombian government. However, talks between the two parties are continuing constructively in neighboring Caracas, Venezuela. The ELN and the larger Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia have been operating for decades in mostly the jungles and the mountains in some of the poorest peasant communities who are often African Colombian and also native peoples. They operate in communities in the jungles and the mountains where the Colombian state has no reach, has no education or healthcare provided to these communities, which instead the left-wing guerrillas do provide. In news from Britain, the former social mobility chief, Birbalsingh, who's also an infamous and notorious educational leader in London, has quit her job, arguing that she does not want to be a distraction from the Tory government as she brings a lot of controversy to her role. She has very right-wing positions applied to the education system and children within it, including arguing that children should not listen to the black-led cultural musical form, grime, and other right-wing postures. Another Tory minister, for the International Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, who's also an infamous far-right figure, has expressed solidarity with Birbalsingh. People like Badenoch and Birbalsingh and people like Priti Patel and Kwasi Kwarteng point to the growing black and brown-faced far-right British nationalist politics that we are seeing. It's a form of sophistication of whiteness and white supremacist rule in this far-right trajectory. Many thanks for listening. Please do like, subscribe and share. Thank you.